My name is Zach Dobek. I'm a graduating senior at Columbia High School in Maplewood, New Jersey. Next year, I'm going to the University of Delaware on a full scholarship, and I'm going to study marine science. When I was 11, I developed a rare infection in my leg, and I'm here to tell you my story. When I was 11 years old, I was just another normal kid. I love playing sports. I love being outside. I was a baseball player, a basketball player, a football player, and I was just a pretty normal kid. I loved being around my friends and stuff like that. The day I first started feeling symptoms, I had a doubleheader baseball game. And right after my second game of the doubleheader, I started feeling knee pain. I started feeling it when I started running around the bases. And after the game, I had a headache and I was just in extreme pain in my knee.
Hi, my name is Marnie Dobek. I'm Zach's mom, and I'm here to give my input on Zach's scary infection. As Zach mentioned, his symptoms started first during a doubleheader baseball game. So my husband and I watched him play, and he had played pretty well. And after the games ended, we went over to congratulate him, and he was actually starting to cry, which was very unusual for Zach, even at the age of 11. And when I was asking him what was wrong, I was surprised, and he told me that he had a headache, he was dizzy, and that his knee hurt. We just thought maybe he was hungry, maybe he was tired. He had done some sliding and throwing in the game, so maybe he had hurt some of his joints. So we didn't really think much of it as his parents. So we took him home and got dinner ready, and Zach did not want to eat dinner that night. And Zach was an 11-year-old that really liked to eat dinner. So we were a little bit surprised that he was going to be skipping a meal. And that might have been a sign that something was a little bit different this time than a regular kind of complaint of knee pain.
The next morning, I woke up hoping to feel better, and unfortunately, that was not the case. My knee was still in pain, and I felt much more sick than I did the night before when I was playing the baseball game. When I woke up, I did not think I was going to be able to go to school, but it was towards the end of the year. I was doing fun things in my classes, and I still wanted to go. So after I took some Advil, I felt a little bit better, and I decided that I would go to school for a little bit.
So the next morning, Zach woke up still in quite a bit of knee pain. At that point, I was really unsure what was causing his pain, but I gave him some Tylenol or Advil. I can't remember if I gave him both or one or the other to help with his pain. And we initially decided he was going to stay home from school. But he, after about an hour or so, said that he felt well enough to go to school. And so I was able to take him into the school late, and I dropped him off, and I went about doing my various errands that I would do that day. But it wasn't long, about maybe an hour or so after I dropped him off, that the school nurse gave me a call that Zach had come to her complaining again that his knee hurt. And she said that he didn't have a fever, but he had pretty severe knee pain, and he was limping. And she told me, and her exact words were, "He just doesn't look right." And I didn't really know what was causing his symptoms, but I agreed that something seemed odd. So I went ahead and went to go pick him up, and I brought him home from school, and I got him home. I sat him on the couch, and I propped up his leg on the couch. I think we might've put an ice pack on at that point. And I gave him some Advil and some Tylenol to work together to help with the pain. And after a little bit, I noticed that he was running a fever. So I waited a while, and I kept doing things that I needed to do around the house. And then I checked his temperature again, and his temperature had actually gone up, which was a little bit unusual. Usually, at least with my kids, when I would give them Tylenol or Advil, the fever would come down. So this was one of the first times I gave my kid Advil or Tylenol, and when I rechecked the temperature, it was actually higher. So I thought it was a little strange. I still didn't really have a clear idea of what was going on. And I figured we would just wait and see.
So when I went to school, I made it through first period, and when I was transitioning between first and second period, my knee really started hurting. So my friend had helped me down the stairs, and I limped all the way down the stairs with my knee pain to the nurse's office. And he said, "You need to go home. Something's not right." And after that, the nurse sent me home.
So Zach's symptoms were kind of strange. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but the best I could guess at that point was that he had some sort of virus causing him fever and joint pains.
The next day after the nurse had sent me home, the symptoms still did not go away. I was still starting to feel worse. The pain was really bad and my fever was really high. I remember vividly throughout the day that there was just constant crying because I was in so much pain. And at this point, I wasn't really so focused on what I thought about the symptoms. I was more just focused on I need to get better as soon as possible. And I was kind of unaware of what was going on. Like I was, with the pain and the fever, it was just, my mind was not focused on what's happening to my body right now.
So by that third day, which was a Friday morning, I had headed off to work and I got a call from our babysitter that she could hear Zach up in his room crying in pain. And I was starting to get worried. You know, he was in a significant amount of pain. You know, 11 and 12-year-old boys don't cry like that so easily. So I was very concerned about how much pain he had. He had ongoing fevers. They would get better and worse with the medicine, but he had ongoing fever and there really wasn't a clear explanation for what was going on. And I think at that point I decided it was just long enough and it was just time to get some experts involved. So I had my babysitter bring him to his primary care physician for a visit. So what I haven't told you yet is not only am I Zach's mom, but I also happen to be a family doctor. So when my babysitter brought Zach to a doctor, she actually brought him to my office to see one of my associates. I didn't want to see Zach myself because it's hard to be objective when you're someone's mom. But he came into the office to see one of my associates, who is a primary care physician, who I felt could look at the whole picture, you know, as opposed to a specialist that might focus on something very narrow. His primary care physician could really look at him and all of his symptoms and really take everything into account and help us try to come up with a diagnosis. So Zach got to my doctor's office and I took a break from working and I went into the room with him, and my associate took a look at him, and Zach was in a lot of pain. He couldn't even sit still because of the pain, but you guys probably can understand this. When the doctor came in, he acted very stoic. So he kind of stopped moving around and was almost acting like he wasn't in pain, but I knew he was. And the doctor looked at his leg and his knee where he was having pain at the time, and she checked his temperature. There didn't look too much, you know, there wasn't too much to see at that point. His leg wasn't red, it wasn't swollen. He was able to move it, but he just had these strange symptoms. So she had one of the nurses draw some blood work to help give some more information about what was going on. She even gave Zach some pain medicine that was a little bit stronger, and she gave him an antibiotics to start. She sort of made a guess that maybe he might have Lyme disease because Lyme disease, which is a disease that you get through a tick bite, can give you joint pains and swelling and things like that. So she started him on an antibiotic just in case that's what it was. So Zach left with those 2 prescriptions and the blood work was sent off to the lab, and he went home with my babysitter and I went back to work. So the doctor that we saw in my office gave Zach amoxicillin, which is one of the options that you can use for treating Lyme disease. It's a pretty gentle antibiotic and it doesn't cause stomach upset or other things like that. So it was a good start. After Zach went home, my office got a call from the lab, and the lab is the place where the blood tests were being processed. So we got a call from the lab that some of his tests were very abnormal. So one in particular is called the C-reactive protein, or we call it the CRP. And that CRP measures the amount of inflammation in your body. And Zach's CRP came back extremely high. It was concerning. And so the lab called our office to let us know that it was what we call a critical result. It was serious and something we needed to act on. So once we got that information, the doctor that Zach had seen in my office decided it was time to get a consultation with an orthopedist who's a bone doctor. So the doctor he saw in my office called and set up an appointment, and my babysitter was able to take Zach directly over to the orthopedist.
My babysitter ended up taking me to the orthopedist where they decided to run some more tests. There was an x-ray done, and they did something called tapping the knee joint, where they take fluid out of my knee to measure for infections and stuff like that. And although I was kind of delirious this whole time, all I remember is when they were tapping my knee joint, they had a huge needle, and it was extremely scary. Yeah.
So my babysitter took Zach to the orthopedist, but at this point I was getting kind of concerned myself. So I left work and drove over to meet Zach at the orthopedist. When I got there, Zach had already had an x-ray taken of his knee, and the doctor was about to do a tap of his knee joint. And that is when you stick a needle into the knee joint and you pull the fluid out of the joint, and you can test that fluid for all kinds of things, different types of cells and other signs of infection. So the doctor took care of that, and he pulled out some fluid that looked kind of yellow in color. Usually it's more clear, but sometimes when there's an infection in a joint, it's actually like pus that's in your knee. It would be really thick, white material that came out of the joint. So although the fluid was a little bit yellow, it really wasn't thick and really infected looking. So the doctor thought at that point that Zach probably had a viral infection, which is what I had thought from the beginning, and that he was having a reaction in his joints. Sometimes we call it a viral synovitis or a viral arthritis, where the fact that you have the virus causes the joint or the lining of the joint to become inflamed and swollen and painful. So that was the sort of going diagnosis at that point. Zach was pretty sick at that point. He was sort of out of it even at that appointment. And I do remember thinking at that point that I had just never seen a viral infection cause such severe symptoms before. And I was honestly sort of doubting the diagnosis, but I didn't know what else it could possibly be. So we sort of just went with it, but I really wasn't sure.
I still remember that my knee was in so much pain that I couldn't walk up the stairs. So I had to take the long ramp all the way around. And each step was just excruciating pain to get up the ramp.
While we were at the orthopedist, Zach looked really sick. He was kind of laying there looking pale, not really engaging with us. And he looked what I would call toxic. And that's a term that we use in the world of medicine, when it's really a term for when somebody looks really super sick, just not well. We say that the person looks toxic. And I would say that Zach looked that way at that point.
So after the orthopedist appointment, the symptoms somehow still got worse. I eventually got to the point where moving any muscle in my body would take immense effort. So even to move my head or move my arm, I would have to ask my mom or my brother to literally move me, which is scary to think about. I remember that I had to use the bathroom, and I physically could not walk to the bathroom. So I had my brother, I got on his back. He gave me a piggyback ride to the bathroom so that I could use the bathroom. And the fever just kept getting worse, and the pain just kept getting worse.
So now we're on day 4, which was Saturday. Zach continued to be in really severe pain, and it just kept getting worse and worse. So throughout that day on Saturday, he started to have pain not only in his knee, but really all over his body, and he really couldn't move. He really, honestly, he could barely turn his head, he could barely move his arm, and he would ask us for help, even if he just wanted to tilt one way or the other way. He also developed a rash on that day. It was sort of a red, raised, bumpy rash, scattered on his arms and legs, which was kind of interesting because at that point I was doubting that he had a virus, but rashes are pretty common with viruses. And so I thought, well, maybe it is a virus after all. So he developed this rash. He continued on that amoxicillin. We still didn't know if it was Lyme disease or not, but it didn't seem to be helping very much at all. As a matter of fact, he kept getting worse. And, as that day went on, he couldn't walk at all. We literally had to pick him up and carry him. Saturday evening, things just progressed. And by nighttime, Zach could not walk up the stairs to go to bed. So my husband literally had to scoop him up off the couch and carry him up to bed, which was excruciatingly painful for Zach. But my husband carried him upstairs, and he actually put him in our bed. And my husband and I came back downstairs to just clean up the kitchen and get ready to go to bed ourselves. So once we finished, we went back upstairs and went into our bedroom, and we told Zach that we were going to pick him up again and move him into his own bed. And he asked us at that point if he could just stay in our bed because he was so uncomfortable and he felt like it would just be better to stay there. So we let him stay in our bed, and my husband slept on the couch, and I stayed with Zach because I was so concerned about him. And as the night went on, he was tossing and turning, he was feverish, and he kept asking for water, and it was a very restless several hours. And finally, I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, he asked for the water bottle. And as I grabbed it and went to go hand it to him, he had a really strange reply. He asked me if someone was going to fly the water bottle to our house. And I looked at him very, I said, "What?" And he said, no, I just said that because I was tired. And I said, "Okay." And I got the water and I went to go hand it to him again. And he said the exact same thing a second time. And at that point, I really got scared because I knew something was very wrong because he was almost hallucinating. So I ran downstairs and I told my husband it was time to take him to the emergency room, that we really needed to figure out what was going on. So we went back upstairs to tell Zach we were going to take him to the emergency room. And he actually asked if he could just go in the morning because he was so tired. But I'm really glad we woke him up and took him to the emergency room. So we took Zach to the emergency room in the middle of the night, and we got him there, and the medical people in the emergency room did all kinds of tests trying to figure out what was causing Zach's symptoms. They were looking for viruses and bacteria and whatever they could think of. So finally, as the morning started to come, the decision was made by the pediatric emergency room that Zach was too unstable to stay there. They wanted him to be transferred to a hospital that had a pediatric intensive care unit. So they arranged for a transfer via ambulance, and Zach was transferred over to a different hospital where they had a pediatric intensive care unit. And once he got there, they started him on what we call broad spectrum antibiotics, meaning antibiotics that would fight all kinds of infections because they still weren't sure what was going on. They also gave him oxygen and fluids and things like that just to help stabilize him. Zach continued to destabilize while he was in the pediatric ICU, meaning he kept getting worse and worse. So they started off by putting a little tube in his nose that was giving him oxygen that way. And when that wasn't enough, they put a mask over his face to increase the amount of oxygen he was getting. And finally, in the evening, the pediatric intensive care unit doctor asked to meet with my husband and I. And the reason he wanted to meet with us was to tell us that he felt that Zach was working too hard to breathe, that he just wasn't getting enough oxygen. And he felt it would be best to put him on a respirator or a ventilator so that he would be able to rest and get enough oxygen. So my husband and I stepped out of the room, and we were outside maybe for about 20 minutes. And when we came back to the room, it was pretty hard to believe that our 11-year-old son that had been playing baseball just a couple of days before was actually on a respirator. They had put him into a medically induced coma because being on a respirator is very uncomfortable. And when people have the tube down their throat breathing for them, they sometimes try to fight it and resist it. So by putting people into an induced coma, they just rest and sort of aren't aware of anything that's going on so that the ventilator can really help them. But it was pretty hard to believe that that was happening to my son. 2 days after we were in the pediatric ICU, there was a breakthrough of sorts. We got a call from the lab from the original hospital where we had gone to the emergency room that Zach's blood culture was growing a bacteria that we call MRSA, or MRSA. So once they knew that the blood culture was growing MRSA, they assumed that the infection was probably coming from his knee area where he was complaining of pain since the first day. So Zach was sent urgently for an MRI of his leg, where they confirmed that there was, in fact, a large bone infection in his femur. So part of the reason that Zach was so sick was that this infection in his bone was causing him to go into septic shock. So septic shock is when an infection triggers your body almost to go into overdrive. So the infection, your body almost overreacts to it. And this overreaction can cause issues with your blood pressure and your circulation. And that's what was happening to Zach. So Zach was in the ICU for, I think, about 2 full weeks. It was very difficult to treat this infection in his leg. They worked with various types of medications and different doses and trying to get rid of all the bacteria in his body. There were lots of ups and downs in the course of his illness. So it was a really scary time. So in order to treat this infection, Zach was on multiple antibiotics. So antibiotics are medicines that either kill or stop the growth of bacteria. And we use different antibiotics for different infections. So one antibiotic that Zach was on is called vancomycin, and it's one that is often used when someone has a MRSA infection. So Zach was on very high doses of this vancomycin because it's very tough to get rid of that bacteria in the bone. But unfortunately, medications like vancomycin given at high doses can have side effects. So Zach needed to be monitored for things like kidney issues due to the medication. So he was having constant blood tests to check the level of the antibiotic and to check the function of his kidneys while he was getting this antibiotic. So Zach wasn't only getting antibiotics for the infection, they also needed to do surgery to actually clean the infection out of the bone. So Zach was taken to the operating room, I believe, 6 different times, and they went in and they literally would sort of put a slot in the bone and wash it out. So they were mechanically trying to clear out the infection while they were also giving him antibiotics to fight it through the blood. Well, this whole experience was just so insane. To have a healthy child playing sports 5 days a week, one day, and a few days later to be on a respirator in the hospital with doctors contemplating even amputating their leg, or I would sit at night wondering if he was actually going to survive. It's just hard to believe that an infection in a healthy child could come and take over and make you question everything you thought was your reality.
Eventually, the infection did start to clear, but I will still have complications to this day. In the hospital, I was on so much medication that I did go through withdrawal after I woke up from the coma. And now I definitely have some complications, including I have a leg length discrepancy, which means my legs are a little bit different lengths. My feet are also a little bit different in length. I actually developed nerve damage when I was in the medically induced coma, and my left calf has atrophy. It has a little bit of atrophy. It was definitely harder to play sports for me after the whole ordeal.
So once Zach stabilized and I had a little bit of time to think, I really started to wonder, where on earth did this infection come from? So I thought, and I asked a whole bunch of doctors about their thoughts on where this possibly could have come from. And they really said it could have come from anywhere. It could have been something so simple as a scrape, a cut, or even something so simple as a hangnail. Hard to believe he could get so sick from something so minor like that.